Hello and welcome back to CBR MTG. My name is Angus Mackay and I'm joined here by Tyrone. Hi Tyrone.
Hi Angus, how you going?
Very good, thank you. Tyrone, how did you sort of come into the format and give us a little bit of an intro about yourself as well?
So I'm a level 1 judge. I live in Toowoomba. I've been playing Magic since about Return to Ravnica-ish. I first played Highlander at the GP Brisbane 1 or 2 years ago, I don't quite remember. And back then I was playing some terrible 5-point Soul Ring Abomination that was, I think it was a Jund Birthing Pod deck. Um, and I loved the format, I thought it was really cool. At that point, I was also slowly building into Legacy Doomsday Storm, which
Ooh.
accidentally got banned, basically when they got rid of Sensitive Divine Top and Gitaxian Probe.
hmm
But I had like one of every card in the deck, so I thought, hey, I'll give this a go. So I decided to build Storm.
The deck that you brought to the table today for our Highlander deck tech series, this is gluten-free Storm, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's
How
a
did you?
fun name that I decided to give this thing.
I like it. I like it. Why did you go with gluten-free Storm, and how does it differ from some of the other storms in the format that we've seen?
Well, the biggest difference between this Storm deck and other Storm decks in the format are this one does not have Black Lotus, which there's a couple of reasons for that. The biggest reason is that Black Lotus is ridiculously expensive, and the other reason is it's 4 points, and I sort of wanted to see what else you could do with those 4 points in a Storm deck. It's got no flour. It's gluten free, right?
That's very good. And the reason that maybe Storm has been underplayed lately is because of the Black Lotus. So usually your points consist of two cards. That's Yawgmoth's Will, which is 3 points, and Black Lotus, which is four. And as you mentioned before, kind of makes it pretty unapproachable for people. But Storm is such a popular archetype, it'd be a shame to just let it go because of the card availability, not being able to play Black Lotus. Why don't you go through your deck list, how it works, your points specifically?
Storm is a lot of fun. A lot of people play Storm in Modern, and it's a very popular format, popular deck there. Sorry, and Legacy, same thing. So in Highlander, um, one of the other big things that my deck has different to others is that it has more cost reducers. So Baral, Chief of Compliance, and Goblin Electromancer are ones that everyone knows from Modern, and I think JP is playing a few of them in his lists currently as well. But I'm also running Nightscape Familiar, which decreases the costs of a lot of my spells, and Curious Homunculus, which is a very curious little boy. On the front side, he taps for a single colorless mana that can only be used for instants and sorceries. But on the back side, he's the biggest, baddest chief of compliance you've ever seen.
Yeah, and I can see, even though it's a little bit slower, you will be able to flip that Curious Homunculus pretty quickly.
Yeah, a couple cantrips, couple maybe a ritual to power out something. Yeah, you can definitely get there, and you can sort of think of him as like a grape shot if your opponent doesn't have any creatures on the field.
A good way to sort of look at when you're sort of going through other versions of Storm in 4-ob formats, you kind of try and get the ratios pretty close. I noticed that you have five cost reducers, sorry, four cost reducers, which is not too dissimilar from Gift Storm has in Modern, where it's actually kind of all in on those cost reducers, whereas in Highlander you don't see the cost reducers around as much, but you're going very deep with the Nightscape Familiar and the Curious Homunculus, which I do like a lot.
Yeah. I think Modern Storm plays generally six of these guys. If six different ones were legal in Highlander that cost 2 mana or so, I'd probably play six.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, they don't. So the reason you play these is because losing Black Lotus is losing a lot of mana, and these guys can really get you back up there. Because of these guys, I also play less eggs and more instants and sorceries that work with them. So onto acceleration, the way you get your mana, because this deck needs a lot of mana, as all Storm decks do. Lion's Eye Diamond is our budget Black Lotus. It's very good, but you have to cast it and use it in the correct way. You have to cast a Brainstorm, hold priority, and crack your Lion's Eye Diamond in response, or something like that. And the fact that the deck's running quite a lot of draw sevens, which we'll get into later, it can abuse this quite effectively. It's running a whole suite of rituals: Rite of Flame, Dark Ritual, all the good ones. Manamorphose is often the best card in the deck, as it is in Modern Storm, and a Mox Diamond and a Chrome Mox as well to help get things out there. So next up is cantrips.
hmm
Of course, Storm has to run a lot of cantrips. Legacy and Modern Storm all run their preordains and their brainstorms, their play sets. You have to dig a little bit deeper, unfortunately. You have to peer through depths and anticipate Frantic Search is on par with Manamorphose is one of the best cards in the deck. These are both cards that get better and better the more cost reducers you have out, and they are honestly insane. Compulsive Research is sort of a flex slot. It's 3 mana, which doesn't sound great, but it digs you a lot of cards deep. But it is definitely a flex slot. And Act on Impulse is there almost purely for Doomsday piles. If you have a Black Lotus in your deck, Doomsday piles are a lot easier, but if you don't, you kind of need to Act on Impulse.
Frantic Search working as a ritual, basically, because if you have a cost reducer out, you get to untap 3 lands, despite the fact that, you know, it's costing 1 or 2, you know?
Yeah. Faithless Looting, but it's also a ritual, is pretty insane.
Believe it or not. What about the engine pieces?
So this is the pieces that really make the deck run. I'll go through the pointed cards first, which is 1 point for Memory Jar, 1 point for Time Spiral, 1 point for Dark Petition, 3 points for Yawgmoth's Will, and 1 point for Gifts Ungiven. Yawgmoth's Will is incredibly powerful. If you're playing Storm and you're not running Yawgmoth's Will, I want to say you're doing it wrong. It's just ridiculously good. The card is broken, absolutely broken, and very much worth the 3 points it costs. So Memory Jar and Time Spiral are draw 7s. If you really want to build this deck not on a budget, then you can definitely replace the Memory Jar with a Time Twister. But those are getting a bit expensive these days as well, so I decided not to. Time Spiral, Memory Jar, because you've got these cost reducers, you can really go off with a very little amount of mana. If you cast one of these, have a cost reducer on the field, and have maybe 1 or 2 mana left at the end, you can often just continue on. The Memory Jar is kind of good that you can slap it down the field, and then next turn, once you've got all your mana again, you can set off with it, which is pretty nice. Dark Petition is a really, really good tutor. It's no demonic tutor, but again, with a single cost reducer, it's better than demonic tutor because it costs 4 mana and then gives you 3 afterwards, which is very powerful. Gifts Ungiven is another card that can kind of again with cost reducers, it'll get you out of sticky situations, and the fact that you're running Past in Flames and Yawgmoth's Will in the deck means that any 4 you can almost always find 4 cards that will kill your opponent. The reason I play these for single pointed cards is because drawing any of them when you have an empty hand will probably get you there as long as you can cast it, which is one of the big differences between this one and JP Storm. There's not as many cards in that deck where you can just have an empty hand, draw a card, and then go off. Two other similar cards to that are Wheel of Fortune, which was recently depointed. Extremely strong in this deck, and honestly, Wheel of Fortune in this deck is better than a Time Twister. I'd rather run Wheel of Fortune over Time Twister. Yawgmoth's Will, Past in Flames, they make those cards in the graveyard not quite a waste, but it's very nice. Doomsday is another card that you can just rip off the top and almost not quite immediately win. Sometimes you have to pass the turn, but Doomsday is if you cast and resolve a Doomsday, you will often just win on the spot. It's very, very strong.
So you do have dedicated Doomsday decks where, you know, you're just trying to get to Doomsday so you can put 5 cards in. Usually it's a Laboratory Maniac or sometimes it's Sheldock Isle. What is a fantastic Doomsday pile, or does it change depending on the situation?
Doomsday is notoriously difficult to play. The card is very, very hard to play and survive, because you have to look at all the cards in your deck, all the cards in your graveyard, and pick the 5 best ones out, which can be very, very hard. So your classic Doomsday piles will almost always involve Lion's Eye Diamond, Act on Impulse, a win condition, Yawgmoth's Will, and then another 5th card, whatever it is you need, whether it be a ritual or a Gitaxian Probe, or sometimes a land. I put lands in Doomsday piles. And so the basic idea behind those basic Doomsday piles is you cast your Act on Impulse, exile Yawgmoth's Will, Lion's Eye Diamond, and a cantrip or something. You'll cast your Lion's Eye Diamond, crack the Lion's Eye Diamond to make enough mana to cast your Yawgmoth's Will. So the fact that Act on Impulse leaves these cards in exile is a very important part. So you don't have to discard them for your Lion's Eye Diamond. Then cast your cantrip to draw whatever that last card was. Yawgmoth's Will to cast stuff in your graveyard again, the Lion's Eye Diamond and all that, and make enough mana to win with Tendrils or Laboratory Maniac. If you're just picking this deck up for the first time, if you're just proxying this deck up and you're like, hey, I want to try Storm, cut it. just cut it. It will lose you more games than it will win. It is you really, really have to look deep into Doomsday Piles to cast the card and not just stare at your deck for 5 minutes thinking, what have I gotten myself into? It is extremely hard to cast and to win through, but it's very, very powerful.
It's definitely one of those cards that promote you knowing so much. Like when your knowledge base is so high, especially around your deck specifically, the cards in it, so you got to know what you're looking for and what kind of how you're going to construct your win. But once you sort of get that under pat, or if you spend hours and hours goldfishing, if you really like Storm and you wanna learn this deck correctly, you should be playing Doomsday. You can just spend hours goldfishing, finding the correct lines, and sort of once you figure out how to win without disruption, then the hard bit comes.
Absolutely. There's a lot of small tricks you can do with Doomsday, like after you cast your Doomsday, you can cast a Brainstorm and put cards into your Doomsday pile and weird stuff like that. Which, but yeah, Doomsday is very, very strong.
Yeah.
Mind's Desire is incredibly strong. Usually, if you resolve a Mind's Desire for Storm count of 7 or 8, you just flip the top 8 cards off your deck and win on the spot. I have lost after Mind's Desiring for, I think, 8, and then later in the same turn, 16 or something. I just whiffed incredibly hard.
Oh my gosh.
And Bonus Round is another new card that people may not know about from Battle Bond, which is 1 red. Anytime a player casts an instant or sorcery this turn, they copy that spell. I've got 2 Wheel of Fortunes on the stack. One of them resolves. I cast a Manamorphose before the other one resolves, which makes another copy of that. My opponent spell snares both my Manamorphoses, and I Fluster Storm. It was Bonus Round is very, very strong because it basically doubles your rituals, but it makes very weird games of Magic as well.
Yeah, and also a combo with Past in Flames as well, where you can cast bonus round again, and then things get real messy.
Yep, it's pretty absurd.
Yeah, so we're talking about goldfishing and trying to perfect your game plan before disruption, but I think I'd like to talk about sort of Storm's place in the field right now, in the sort of overall meta, and how much disruption are you likely to face, and sort of how do you work around that disruption?
So there's a lot of blue decks out because it is an Eternal format, and there's a lot of people running, the Melbourne 7 points, and Force Wills and Fluster Storms are difficult to beat. So game 1, you really just want to try and go as fast as possible, just go underneath them if possible. And if it all fails out, then you've still got a chance. Maybe you'll just draw a Wheel of Fortune and restock. But yeah, so blue decks are definitely hard. Blue decks with a clock are even harder, because if they just counter all your stuff and don't have a clock, you can rebuild. But if you're playing against a tempo deck, it's a lot of trouble. So tempo decks are probably the biggest predator for Storm decks, just because they have disruption and they can kill you quickly. Non-blue based disruption decks aren't that bad. If they're duressing you, if they're thought seizing you, hymning you, that's not that bad. It's workable. The big difference is if you're spending 3 mana for a Wheel of Fortune and they counter it, then you're in trouble. If they're spending 1 mana to get rid of your Wheel of Fortune, just cast something else.
Yeah, I can imagine that with the prevalence of Kess Pile and Rug Tempo, or Rug Life as it's called, in the current meta, I can imagine that it would be pretty hard to sort of fend against it at this very point in time.
I've not actually played against Rug Life, but I imagine it would be a very, very hard matchup. Kess Pile is not the end of the world because, like I said, they don't have much. They usually only run a very small amount of win conditions.
One of the reasons to play gluten-free Storm over regular Storm, JP Storm, as was mentioned before, is the price difference. So there's quite a significant price difference once you take out the Black Lotus, and it seems to be very functional. At least it looks like a lot of fun, which is exciting. For new players just picking up this deck, how would you sideboard against different archetypes in the format?
Against the blue control decks, you want Flusterstorm, City of Solitude, Defense Grid, and some number of Thought Seizers and Dresses and Inquisitions, depending on how many you can fit in to the main deck.
Sure.
For creature-based matchups, if they have disrupting creatures, then you want to bring in Firespout, Massacre, Abrupt Decay, that sort of thing. Although often enough, you can just not sideboard against those decks if they don't have much disruption and just go underneath. Young Pyromancer is also an option against very, very disruptive decks that don't have that much of a clock, like Kess Pile.
Sure.
because it's just another threat that they have to answer. And you're hoping they'll bring out some of their creature removal. Doesn't always work because you do run a few creatures in the main, which are pretty important.
Mm.
Obviously, against opposing combat decks, you want Flusterstorm if they're a spell-based combat deck, Thoughtseize, Duress Inquisition if they're not, and probably if they are as well. Chain of Vapor if they're more permanent base decks, Tormod's Crypt if they're graveyard decks, Night Swell again against graveyard decks.
Yep.
But it all sorts of depends on what kind of disruption they're bringing in. If their disruption is Force of Will, then you want Thoughtseizers. If their disruption is Rule of Law, then you want Chain of Vapor.
Yeah. So it's interesting because you do have to sort of preempt what hate your opponent is bringing in as well, game 2. So if you win game 1, you sort of it's a little bit harder because in Legacy the sort of archetypes are defined and the sideboard slots aren't that different because you can play 4-ofs. But in Highlander, you kind of got to either get lucky or know everyone's deck very well, know that they are playing that Rule of Law in their sideboard, or they're just going to go with Surgical, not Surgical, maybe something a little bit more impactful, but you're either trying to go for spell-based hate or permanent-based hate, of which you'll have to work out how much you want to dilute your main board to allow for these anti-hate pieces.
Yeah, and sometimes the cards you take out are also dependent on what they're bringing in. So if they're bringing in a whole bunch of graveyard hate, maybe you take out the Past in Flames, maybe the Yawgmoth will, and Repeal, Muddle the Mixture, and Compulsive Research are the 3 cards I take out the most. They're sort of flex slots, really. Sometimes you take out the Doomsday parts, so like the Acton Impulse, the Doomsday, and Laboratory Maniac. Because if they've got a whole bunch of counterspells, resolving Doomsday may not be the end of the world. Like, you resolve the Doomsday, and then they can just counter everything inside it. Yeah, trimming things here and there are pretty good.
Okay, that seems pretty reasonable. Instead of thinking about each one as an individual card, just sort of putting them in piles like accelerants or engine pieces or cost reducers or stuff, actually helps you decide what you want to side out and side in because they're all functionally pretty similar cards.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Tyrone, for joining us on our Highlander Deck Tech series. Is there anything that you want to shout out or anything before we sign off?
Just a shout out to the Toowoomba Magic the Gathering crew, where we all have a lot of fun there, and it's a very growing format. We get about as many people as we do Standard or Modern, which is pretty exciting.
That's wonderful. Yeah, we can see the Highlander format really picking up in a lot of different places, so it's really nice to get some representation outside of the few big states playing Highlander. So thank you so much once again, Tyrone, for joining us on our CBR MTG Highlander Deck Tech series. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for having me.
See you later.